Many who chance upon these words will doubt them. Some will dismiss my account as the delirium of an unsound mind. Others may even find amusement in my confessions, and to them I offer no protest. My purpose is not to persuade the skeptical, nor to beg belief from the indifferent. I write in the frail hope that someone, some solitary soul acquainted with the darker strata of existence, might discern in my testimony a pattern familiar and perhaps offer aid, though I fear such aid no longer lies within mortal reach. Before all else, I must refute the easy accusation of madness. I know what madness is. I have glimpsed it from so near that I can feel its breath upon my thoughts, yet I have not yielded to it. My mind remains my own, shaken, yes, but unbroken. And because I would prove this to myself as much as to any reader, I must retrace the spectral path that led me here, step by step, back to the day that tore the veil from the hidden world. That day, meant to mark the birth of my new life, became instead the genesis of my ruin. It was then the floodgates opened, and all that should have remained unseen poured through. From that hour onward, I have lived in the shadow of abominations, too vast, too obscene, to have ever been conceived by human thought. 2 weeks ago it began, the day that was meant to be one of rebirth for my wife and I, the day of our marriage, though the union was, in its essence, a legal bond. The significance of that fact did little to diminish the extraordinary weight of the day. It was the day we would begin living together without restraint, a day that permitted me to acquire a titre de séjour and remain in France with her. For over 6 months, we had labored in the shadow of bureaucracy, traveling back and forth in pursuit of the necessary papers. And so, on the day itself, we intended not merely to proceed, but to savor it, to stretch every moment into eternity. The sun rose, spilling its harsh, golden light upon the world, as though marking our union with cosmic approval. My wife had labored over our wedding cake, while I had toiled over the meal the previous day. On that morning, all that remained was the final touches of the cake, a task she undertook with hands that trembled like fragile wings. I, meanwhile, was paralyzed in a curious fog of distraction. The monumental reality of the day, the marriage itself, had yet to penetrate the cocoon of stress and fear that enveloped me. My wife, on the other hand, was transparently anxious. Each breath shook her chest, her fingers wavered as she traced words upon the cake, and tiny beads of sweat formed against her skin despite the cool, 10-degree autumn air. Her beauty, radiant and undeniable, did nothing to disguise the trembling core of her being. For a fleeting instant, I felt a pang of secondary anxiety, an echo of her fear, but it passed. My mind, always a sanctuary of duty, reclaimed itself, and I bent once more to the obligations of the day, as though my careful hands could shape not only the cake, but reality itself. We had agreed to reveal our attire only at the appointed moment. I prepared myself in the solitude of her uncle's home, while she dressed under her mother's watchful eye. Rarely had I worn a suit, and the strange elegance of the garment pressed against me with unfamiliar weight. Yet I dressed myself with meticulous care, arranging my tie beneath the collar, smoothing every wrinkle, placing the pin with its black gem and the sky-blue flower upon my jacket as if performing a ritual. For a brief, intoxicating moment, I believed the suit had transformed me, and with it, the day itself became palpable, almost real. At the town hall, the official papers awaited our signatures. My eyes first fell upon her, and in that instant, the world narrowed to the singular gravity of her presence. I felt my love for her rekindle with the sudden, inexorable force of an unseen tide, and in her gaze, wide with awe, I recognized the same renewed devotion mirrored back at me, a fragile, luminous connection amid the ordinary machinery of civil procedure. Yet beneath that luminous clarity, I sensed the faintest tremor of something beyond comprehension, a shadow that lingered at the periphery of perception, whispering that what was begun today might not remain safely within the bounds of human understanding. She wore a long white dress that seemed woven of winter's own breath. The fabric did not conceal her form, but rather revealed it in dignified grace, pronouncing her shape without transgression. A single slit at the knee allowed her movement, while upon her shoulders rested a coat of immaculate fur, white as the snows of some forgotten Arctic shore. The purity of her attire made her pallor seem almost spectral, and the faint flush upon her lips and cheeks gave the impression of warmth precariously clinging to something too divine, too fragile, to be mortal. The marriage itself passed with bewildering brevity. 6 months of turmoil, of ceaseless labor and anxious hope, condensed into scarcely 20 minutes of signatures and ceremony. Then we were free to laugh, to take photographs, to imagine our lives beginning anew. It was the happiest day of my life. It was also, though I knew it not then, the last day of my former existence. That evening, we celebrated long after the sun had fled. We opened gifts, shared wine, and lingered in a joy that seemed infinite. When at last the hour grew strange and sleepless, we decided to walk together, a simple stroll through the forest not far from the house, to be alone amid the damp whisper of autumn. The moon guided us, bathing the path in its argent glow. Her dress caught the light and shimmered with a brilliance almost painful to behold. We walked hand in hand, silent more often than not, our glances speaking what words could not. Even now, after all that has followed, my love for her remains the one pure ember in the ashes of my being. The night was ours, but the weather had other intentions. Without warning, the wind grew sharp, and the heavens began to murmur. We laughed at the rain's intrusion, foolishly believing ourselves invincible to such mortal inconveniences. We even kissed beneath the downpour, like actors in a scene too sentimental for life, yet too perfect to resist. How naive we were to believe the storm a simple thing of nature. I would trade every memory of that kiss to undo what followed. Hindsight brands every joy with mockery. For the horrors that have since revealed themselves, born of that single, thoughtless indulgence beneath the storm, no earthly delight could ever compensate. She laughed then, and her laughter, bright and innocent, echoed against the trees. I remember encircling her waist, her brief resistance, the playful twist that broke my hold. She darted back, eyes alive with mischief. Her skirt lifted in her hand, droplets ran from her hair to her cheek, tracing her smile before falling to the earth. For an instant, time itself seemed suspended, a tableau of joy framed by the murmuring dark. Then, with one step forward, the world erupted in light. The heavens split open. She vanished in the brilliance, devoured by radiance, and I was cast into an abyss so profound that light itself became an alien memory. When I first awakened, I was greeted once more by that blinding light, though this time it did not vanish, but waned gradually, as though the heavens themselves grew weary of their brilliance. My wife's face swam into view above me, her beauty disfigured by anguish. The paint upon her cheeks bore the faint, glistening traces of tears long shed, and when she spoke, her voice trembled with a grief that seemed older than her years. I recall the warmth of her tears soaking the gown that shrouded me. A physician soon arrived, a grave man who, with rehearsed solemnity, informed me that I had been struck by lightning. He spoke of burns and miracles, of luck both cruel and divine. "The luckiest and unluckiest man I've ever seen," he said. Ah, if only he knew how pitifully shallow his words were beside the abyss that awaited me. My first encounter with the unhallowed occurred in that same room, beneath the sterile hum of hospital lights. Visiting hours had ended, and my beloved had departed, promising her return with the dawn. I lay half-turned toward the wall, my mind wandering through dim corridors of thought. The white paint before me dissolved, and in its place I saw only the web of my own delirium, some vast, trembling pattern woven by an unseen arachnid poised upon the brink of madness. When I returned from that reverie and let my eyes fall upon the doorway, something shifted in the air. The unseen spider slipped, or was thrust, from its fragile perch, and in that instant, my mind ceased all weaving. I beheld it. Even now the memory sickens me. To call it a monster is to make mockery of the word. No language, however old, can render the blasphemy of that form. It entered the doorway as an adult might stoop to enter a child's playhouse, vast and misshapen, its hide convulsing with unwholesome motion. The color of its flesh was that of some hue denied to mankind, filthy, ancient, and yet unlike any corruption of the earth. It crawled, lurched, and slithered in turns, its countless limbs serving neither grace nor purpose. Even the texture of its surface seemed to violate the laws of matter. It drifted about the room, stooping, groping, lingering near me. I held my breath within my chest, willing myself into silence, praying that my very existence might elude its notice. Its eyes, those crooked, luminous deformities, passed over me again and again, yet seemed to see something beyond me, something dreadful and unseen. At last, it withdrew, squeezing once more through the door like vapor through a narrow crack. And then, oh merciful heavens, as it passed into the hall, the doctor entered. She moved through the monstrosity as though through air, her figure intersecting its impossible frame, unknowing, untouched. She smiled upon me, but the sight of her face against that lingering silhouette froze my veins. I said nothing of what I had seen. My horror she mistook for pain, and though her compassion was genuine, my tongue lay bound by a paralysis that words could never have broken. For even had I spoken, what syllables could convey that which blasphemes against all mortal comprehension? So I smiled faintly and whispered that all was well, though my mind had already glimpsed a world in which nothing ever could be. After the doctor's departure and the soft echo of her footsteps faded down the corridor, I was left alone once more. My thoughts, unguarded, returned to that unnameable visitation. For an hour, my mind labored beneath its image, as if the very air around me still retained the outline of its shape. I contemplated that obscene silhouette until its memory began to blur, not by choice, but by the merciful will of a mind seeking refuge from its own awareness. There are terrors so vast that the brain, in sheer defense, folds them into darkness. So I buried it deep, named it delusion, and convinced myself that sanity had never left me. I only wish it had stayed buried. Not long after I had lulled myself with this fragile reasoning, my wife arrived to take me home. I recall her joy, the tremulous relief that softened her face as she saw me upright and breathing. She embraced me tightly, her scent, warm and familiar, dispelled for a moment all the phantoms of my thoughts. She believed, poor soul, that all was well again. And I too, intoxicated by her hope, began to believe that life might continue unbroken. How pitiful that memory feels now, like watching sunlight upon the deck of a sinking ship. We left the hospital hand in hand, our steps echoing faintly along the sterile tiles. Conversation came easily until we passed through the waiting room. There my words died in my throat. The world before me shifted. The chairs, the patients, the nurse's station, all melted into a scene so profane that the mind could scarcely reconcile the two realities. The waiting room had become a dim and pulsing chamber, its walls breathing, glistening with a moisture that seemed to exhale despair. A colony of monstrous flies, swollen and fused, writhed in a corner like an infected wound of creation. Something vast and unseen pressed along the ceiling, producing a slow, wet popping sound that seemed to crawl behind my eyes. And near the doorway, near the doorway, lingered the same abomination I had seen in my room, its crooked eyes sweeping the floor as though searching for the forgotten. My wife's voice reached me through a fog, gentle yet distant. I could not respond. I remember her grasp tightening on my arm, her words growing urgent, but I could only stare, frozen between the real and the impossible. When at last we stepped outside, the world did not cleanse itself of that corruption. They were everywhere, scattered like debris of some unseen catastrophe, phasing through people, drifting through walls, sliding between trees and lamplight. On the car ride home, the road unrolled like a black river beneath the wheels, and I tried to tell myself it was madness, that my mind had not survived the lightning unscathed. Yet even as I thought this, a rhythmic drumming began in my skull. It was not pain alone, but a cadence, a deliberate alien pulse resonating from some dimension adjacent to thought itself. With each beat, my vision trembled, and I felt as though something beyond the veil was calling, not to my ears, but to my very nerves. I closed my eyes, hoping the darkness would bring silence. It did not. The rhythm only grew stronger, as if in answer. I spent the first few days at home in an uneasy calm. I was fortunate not to glimpse any of them within or about my dwelling, yet their absence was no comfort. Absence, after all, may simply be disguise. The very stillness of the air seemed charged with a waiting presence, as though the walls themselves were aware of what they kept out. That nagging what if grew within me like a fever. Even now as I write this, I have not seen them here, but I feel the time coming when that will change, and you shall soon understand why. My wife, with a patience born of love, observed my quiet terror through the first day. She believed I would unburden myself in time, as I always had. Yet this fear was beyond speech, for words could not confine what I had seen. When at last she broached the subject, I broke before her and wept like a condemned man. I spoke of the vision, not as clearly as I wished, but enough for her to peer into the fog of my madness. She held me, trembling yet unafraid. She did not mock or doubt. Instead, she reasoned gently, like one comforting a child after a nightmare. Her calm lent me a fragile courage, and her belief that I might endure these visions kept me tethered to life. The creatures, I told her, had never touched me. They passed through matter, oblivious to my presence. Perhaps they could not perceive us, or perhaps they simply did not care. The latter thought chilled me more deeply than any malice could. In the days that followed, I began to reclaim some semblance of existence. I started by watching from my window. The town below seemed unchanged, yet among its streets and rooftops crawled those impossible forms. Each a separate heresy of creation, twisted, swollen, pitiably malformed. Limbs sprouted where logic forbade them, faces collapsed into folds of indistinguishable flesh, eyes stared in senseless directions. A mockery of life, obscene in its purposelessness. Had I been their creator, I too would have hidden them from the light. When I finally resolved to leave the house, the act felt like blasphemy. I remember the weight of air against my body, thick and viscous, as though I moved through an invisible mire. Every step was an offense against some unseen decree. Yet I went, to a small market not far from home, to purchase something trivial, a drink, a proof of ordinary life. The streets seemed dreamlike, each sound distant and delayed. None of the beings acknowledged me. They wandered in their vacant procession, unheeding, as if engaged in some higher errand of entropy. And then the light above me dimmed. A vast shadow rolled across the pavement. I looked up and beheld it. It was like a whale, yet not a whale. A monstrous chimera of whale, jellyfish, and ray, its translucent organs draped like ribbons of rotting silk. It drifted through the heavens with the silence of an ancient god, trailing black ichor that sizzled as it fell through the air. Its presence polluted the very blue of the sky. It was magnificent and loathsome, a cathedral of decay adrift in the firmament. My errand was short, mercifully short. I returned with trembling hands, yet unscathed. The monsters in their dreadful disinterest had let me be. My wife rejoiced at my success. Her joy filled the house with warmth I had almost forgotten, and for a moment I believed that perhaps I could live with this madness, so long as it did not draw nearer. Oh, how foolish such hopes seem now. She urged me days later to visit the library, my old refuge. She thought that in returning to my former habits, I might return to myself, and so I agreed. I spent that night preparing, convincing my heart that knowledge could protect me. Yet deep within, another part of me stirred. The part that had felt that rhythmic drumming within the skull, whispering that what I sought in books had already begun to seek me. The distance between the library and my home was roughly twice that of my first outing to the mini-mart. A small measure by reason, yet in terror, it felt like traversing worlds. It was, in every sense, a step twice as vast, twice as perilous, and twice as fatal as my first. I departed with my mind primed for revelation, for sights that had no right to exist within the Creator's imagination, and as I walked, it dawned upon me that such creatures were never meant to be found. Perhaps they had been sealed away in some hidden stratum of reality, a vault for rejected life. The lightning, I thought, had torn open some long, dormant pathway within my mind, awakening a sense forbidden to mankind. Through this flaw in perception, I now peered into that blighted dimension and bore witness to what the universe had tried to forget. The walk passed without harm, though not without horror. Each step forward brought me closer to comprehension, and comprehension, I learned, is its own damnation. My mind began to grasp the obscene logic of these things, to analyze their form and habit. Yet this curiosity, this irreverent gaze, would set in motion the chain of events that condemned me to this room, this trembling hand, these bloodshot eyes. Even now as I write, I feel the chill of that moment in my marrow. It began as I returned home. The streets teemed with unholy anatomies, the malformed, the swollen, the unfinished. Towering Nephilim-like figures pressed between buildings, their flesh branching into impossible architectures. Around them crept chimeras, creatures assembled from the refuse of other living things. Their bodies bore eyes upon eyes, 1,000 shifting pupils that gazed in no common direction, each a fragment of an uncoordinated mind. I had almost reached my door when I was noticed. Fool that I was, I lingered to study them, to test whether they truly saw me. I should have looked away. I should have bowed my head and gone inside, but I did not. I stood and stared, and then it happened. Across the street, one of them stirred. It was smaller than the others, yet no less obscene. Its skull encircled by eyes of differing size and hue, a crown of sight. For a moment it faced the heavens, reflective and unmoving. Then, with a sickening precision, every one of its eyes turned toward me, all of them, at once. The sensation was not fear as humans know it. It was a total violation of being, as though a vast, cold intelligence had pressed itself against my soul. My spine arched, my limbs convulsed. There was no scream, for language itself deserted me. I fled, key already in hand, stumbling into the doorway with the desperate grace of prey escaping a god. That moment replays endlessly in my mind. I see those eyes whenever I close mine, shining through the dark like dying suns. Until then, they had ignored me, content to wander their secret purgatory unseen. But my gaze, my hunger to understand, had broken that sacred veil. My wife and I spoke little that night. She wept beside me as I told her what had happened, and together we reached the only conclusion that could be reached. It was my scrutiny, my need to know, that had invited their attention. And ever since, the air around our home feels inhabited. There are times, late at night, when I feel their eyes upon the windows, searching, patient, persistent, and horribly familiar. I have never been one cut from a weak fabric, and though I had faced horrors that mocked creation itself, I still clung to the conviction that living was possible. Yet now I understood. They were not blind to us. They had always known of our existence. What they ignored was our ignorance. They never seemed capable of interacting with matter. They glided through walls, climbed buildings, and passed through each other as though the laws of nature rejected them. This illusion of distance granted me a hollow courage. If they could not touch, they could not harm. To survive, I would simply have to ignore them entirely, walk as though they were nothing, and never again allow my eyes to wander their way. So I planned another excursion, this time to the mini-mart once more. I was not yet ready for a longer journey. It felt absurd, almost comedic, to risk my soul for a bottle of soda. Still, I went, my gaze fixed to the pavement, seeing only the motion of my own feet. The peripheries of vision churned with motion, impossible silhouettes convulsing in silence. I walked with a trembling, disjointed gait, each step a defiance of the instinct that begged me to flee. The cold autumn air pressed upon me like a weight of iron. Thoughts became my only refuge. I forced my mind to stay on trivialities, anything but the obscene pageant writhing just beyond sight. Something vast swung to my left. Something vicious bubbled to my right. I did not look. The mini-mart, blessedly, was vacant of those apparitions. Inside, the fluorescent light felt almost sacred in its normalcy. I exhaled and raised my eyes. The saleswoman regarded me with that dull disinterest particular to the living, and for a moment, I believed myself safe again. I purchased my drink and stepped outside. I must have forgotten. Perhaps I had wanted to feel human again, to see the world rather than the ground. Whatever the reason, I lifted my gaze and froze. Across the street, the crowned one stood waiting. The same entity, the same impossible crown of eyes. They fixed upon me, every single one. A sensation flooded me that the word dread cannot contain. My nerves became strings of fire, my bones felt hollow. I knew somehow that it recognized me, that my terror existed vividly within its mind. I forced my gaze down and began my return. I focused on movement, on rhythm. Left, right, left. Something was wrong. The world had stopped. No motion, no sound. The air was congealed. Even with my eyes on the ground, I felt them. All of them. Their gazes pressed against me like heat from an unseen furnace. I whispered to myself, "Almost home, just keep walking. They can't touch you. They can't touch you." Then something brushed my back. It was hard, coarse, flexible, like a hand made of hair. I ran. I don't remember the streets, nor the door, only the sound of my pulse devouring all else. I locked myself inside, breathless, trembling. I have not left since. They have seen me now. They have touched me. And I fear that even if I stop seeing them, they will still see me. For how does one unmake himself from the memory of a god?